Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, you have a little bit of an echo though, so check your settings on other
echo.
computers around.
Okay,
Wait,
we're
I
gonna
got
try
you.
to get on Mitch's computer.
You should be good now. I have you.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Still echoing? I don't love the side view, but, and okay, I can. Let me do this. Okay. Is that, no, why am I making noise over there? Okay. Ta-da. Want to keep it open on the B Lab computer in case we want to use B Lab, because I think we will. Okay.
Recording in progress.
Sorry, guys. All right, so what we wanted to do was talk about making sure we get good impedance. That's where it'll start. And I don't know why. Okay.
You should be okay.
Okay, I'm good now. Okay, and also we wanted to look at the filters, setting up the filters, because that's confusing in B Lab. So I don't know if anybody's come across that. When you're entering the filters, let's start out. Do you have any questions about that? Can you tell us what you've been doing as far as training?
So I can tell you, I've just done a couple of training sessions, and I've just done the SMR. So set the reward at 12 to 15.
Good.
Just done that a couple times.
Okay, you've done that on yourself?
On my husband.
On your husband. Okay, your lucky
Yeah.
husband. Good. Okay.
And
I have
so
sorry.
he's reporting no change, no difference, just neutral. And so I have a question, just wondering, what should I do next? And also wondering, at the reports at the end of the training session, I don't really know what that means. I don't know what those mean.
Okay, so that's a good thing for us to go over. And the reports are being updated. So you remember a couple of sessions ago when we did the midline and we had just updated the system, and then we had chaos. So we decided we're absolutely not we're gonna update on the weekend and come in and practice and make sure there isn't chaos. So we're gonna work with you with the system that you have, then we will update our system and then give you the updates. But we wanna make sure that they're not chaotic before we do it. Okay, our typical practice in the past has been whenever there's been an update with any system we've used, we wait like 6 months. We wait for them to get out all the bugs because there's always bugs. The thing is with B-Medic, their updating is we ask them to update. So like we're kind of their clinical consultants and we want to see them because we think they're going to be good updates. But even so, it's a clinician working with an engineer, and there has to be kind of a little bit of a back and forth. Okay. So, but definitely, so let's go through just making sure we get the filters in right and everything, and then we'll come back and talk about your husband, because if you've done a few sessions and you're not seeing results, that's a good indication of let's do something else. Okay, so if you do one session and you don't see any change, you might be like, let's do a little bit longer time and see, you know, so you don't need to jump right away and make a quick change. But if you've done 3 and you're not seeing anything, that's a good indicator. Let's look at what we can do. And Mitch is actually going to go over that. He's going to go over that whole protocol selection guide.
And I think what Ann just said, if you train once and you train, we ordinarily advise the first training for a maximum of of around 20 minutes and there isn't any effect, the odds are you wouldn't train again for 20 minutes. What you would change is the time. Okay, you've got three variables that you're able to change. One is the length of a training session, and in this field, pretty much the modal maximum training is 30 minutes. So that's for the vast majority of your clients, that will be the maximum. Now, there are those that you'll see they are sufficiently sensitive that you'll train them for less, but you know, that's the maximum.
Would you train, sometimes I see people train more than 30. Can you say something about that?
Well, yeah, there are cases, and again, in you know, our experience, these are in the minority, but if you find a protocol that's really working and you want to try to get the maximum out of it and you feel that 30 minutes is not perhaps giving you that, well, you can train for longer. I mean, you can, but typically 30 is kind of the maximum, because don't forget, this is, you know, exercising the brain, and you're asking the brain to do something it ordinarily doesn't. And for the average person, 30 minutes of that is kind of the optimum. If you begin to train longer, the brain is fatigued, then it's not going to get as much of a benefit. But again, as with everything, there are exceptions. And these are things you'll learn to judge as you go along. But for now, I would say you're shooting for a maximum of 30 minutes of training time. So that's one variable. The next variable are the filters. You can change, you know, the various frequencies that you are training. You can widen or add inhibit bands. You can change reward frequencies. So that's the other variable. And the third is where the sensors are. So those are the things that are available to you as you tweak your protocols. But the first thing to change when you're getting not, you know, much of an effect is the time. And, you know, you want to max out the time. And then we will talk about, you know, there's some more later, but.
Okay, I just opened B-Lab. Okay, I just opened B-Lab on the other computer, and I'm going to I'm going to share that screen and we can go through. How to set things up. So I want to start emphasizing the importance of routine. If you get a good routine, and we're going to see here why routine is really important, but it just makes life easier for you. Everybody can see my screen, right? You good? All right. We're going to pick Mitch. I think we might do a training with you so we can generate a report. We'll see. Well, we'll pull up a report. Okay, but anyway, say I'm gonna train Mitch today, so I'm gonna pick him, I'm gonna select him. And I want to put in the protocol. Oh, and it comes up as 2 channels, so I'm always gonna change that. Where am I? Display. Anywhere along the way, if somebody says, stop, what did you do? I'm fine with that, but I just changed it to 1 channel.
And let me just throw in here, people, there are people training 2-channel, 4-channel, 19-channel, that's happening. But the vast majority of people doing neurofeedback are doing single channel training. And that's where the vast majority of the research is. And there's nothing currently that says training in more channels is more effective than single channel. Now, you may in your future, you may get with a teacher, you may be at a conference, you may be at a webinar, and you'll hear something about the 2-channel and you'll say, hey, let me try that. But I want to assure you that training single channel is a powerful, well-used, well-researched approach. And it's not like you aren't doing what the majority of the field is doing.
Okay, so I've got Mitch pulled up, and I want to now put in the protocol, right? So I'm gonna pull it, I'm gonna go into filter settings. And I want to load one if I already have it from before. If I don't have it from before, I have to create it. Anybody got any questions about that? You're doing okay with naming your protocols?
I haven't figured out how to pull up the same protocol from the time before.
Okay. So I'm going to go into load and I've named the protocol. So our convention is the way we name is what is the low frequency? In this case, 2 to 7. Sorry, what are the inhibits? So 2 to 7 and 22 to 36. And what is the reward? 12 to 15. So
How did you pull up? I didn't see how you pulled up that box.
Settings, filter settings, and then load.
Oh.
But to load, you must have previously saved as. So these are protocols that we have previously saved. This becomes your library of protocols that you use on a regular basis, or you use with a particular client, or whatever.
Now, if you want, you could go in here and, right, you could make a folder for your client and save all their protocols in the folder.
Okay.
Okay. So, and what I would suggest is, for sure, there's going to be some protocols like you're going to see. I would make a CZ protocol, with an inhibitor 2 to 7 and 22 to 36 and a reward of 12 to 15, because you're going to start a lot of people there. If you want, you can call that my starting protocol. So however you're going to save things is, that just depends on your filing system. Okay, so we're gonna pick this one. And now here, for today, until you hear different from us, this is how it loads, right? The low inhibit is at 95. Wait a minute, let me think. Yeah, the low one, this is a weird protocol I picked, but we're inhibiting 2 to 11 and 16 to 36. Okay, and so the low inhibit, do you see, even though we want it to be 65 at 65, when it loads presently, there's a bug in the program and it doesn't load properly. So you have to adjust that every time. It's going to be fixed. We think it is fixed, but we didn't want to run into that problem that
Well,
we
and-
updated the program.
Let me tell you this, even when it gets fixed, a part of your routine should be when you pull up a protocol, look at those thresholds just to make sure they are where you want them to be for your training session. It's just, I mean, it takes a 2-second look, but it's a good thing to just verify, because there isn't a, well, it's a bad feeling if you begin to train and 3 or 4 minutes in, you look then and see, oh geez, I've been training it at the wrong thresholds.
Okay. This reminds me back to the days when I was a kid. My dad was a private pilot, and he used to make me sit in the plane with him while he went through the checkoff list, and he would read the and this is what all private pilots do. You get in there, you pull out your list on your clipboard, and you read through it out loud, and you say check. Okay, so you're like altimeter, check, gas, check. Okay, same thing here. You want to check every time. Okay, we all have had that bad feeling that Mitch said. And so we emphasize it a lot when we teach, because when you have that bad feeling, it's a bad feeling. Okay, so the low inhibit, we said that we're going to set it 65. The high inhibit, meaning 16 to 36, we're going to set it 95. 90, sorry. And the reward, we're going to set at 60. So I'm going to bring that down. For now, again, I'm going to say this again, the program is not holding these. It does a couple of different things. It might hold it in this place, but it doesn't show it here. So for now, until we tell you it's been updated, fix them every time. Okay, so we've got that, and now we load it. Is that right? Now I'm mixing myself
Oh, you're
up.
loaded.
Yeah, I'm loaded.
I mean, it's ready to go.
So I minimize that now. And here I can see my 2 to 11, my 12 to 15, and my 16 to 36. So right now, let me go back.
Can you clarify for a second too? The screen you were just on, like the B-Medic screen with the lines underneath. And then when you're actually training, you'll see like the little bobble variation. So for the reward, we want it to stay above the line. And for the inhibit, we want it to stay below as long as possible. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And we should emphasize what you are using now at first are what are called auto thresholds. So when you set these, what is happening is the threshold is moving so that, for example, with the low inhibit, 65% of the time, that threshold is at a place where the amplitude is less than the threshold. Okay, so it automatically adjusts. There is a way to set a manual threshold.
It's
that-
right here. So here, you can't hardly see it. There's an A, and now we're on M. We want to be on A.
Yeah, so there is a way to set one manually where that threshold becomes fixed and it will not rise and fall. It will just be there, but that's a higher level, more complex thing to set. And again, while you're first learning to do the auto thresholding, and much of the field is going to the auto thresholding. There was debate for a while, should it be manual, because that was what was available originally. And then they came up with the automatic, and people said, no, you need to do the manual. It's not been shown that either one is better than the other, frankly. And for now, you guys have enough to think about without thinking about setting a manual threshold. So use the automatic threshold feature, which in BMedic in B Lab is the default. I mean, that's what you get.
I have a question. When we're picking the inhibits, I think I'm just confused about what to pick. And so for this one, the example is the low inhibits 2 to 11. So does that mean we're inhibiting delta, theta, and alpha? Okay. And do we ever inhibit 0 to 11? Or is there a reason why we leave 0? Why we start at 2, I guess?
So there's two parts to answering that question. And I don't know if you can explain this better than me, but when you say on the equipment, you're inhibiting 2 to 11, you're actually, because of the way the engineering goes, you're inhibiting 1.5 to 11.5. Okay. So if you go 0, it's not even possible in this system. It is possible to train below 1, but you would never put 0 because that doesn't even work with the system. Okay. So you might put 1, and in that case, you're then ostensibly inhibiting below 1, but I never do that. I never go lower than 2.
Well, and much of what is occurring while a person is awake below 2 is going to be artifact. It's not going to be the actual brain waves. And already in the program, there is programmed in a mechanism to take out if it is a burst at 1 hertz or 1.5 or 0.5 hertz. The program just says that's not really a brain wave. We aren't going to worry about it.
Okay. And would we inhibit the alpha because the person has too much alpha?
Yeah, so in this, I would guess, I don't know who this was created for, but I would guess that this person had, we had probably done a QEEG on them and looked at what was going on, and there was exactly like you said, too much alpha. So there was somebody came in for a mentoring session yesterday, and they had a QEEG that they had gotten done on their patient, And that person had fast alpha, meaning their peak alpha rhythm was 11 and a half. And it was also what we call a wide alpha peak, meaning it extended from like 7 to 13. I was like, well, we don't need more of that. So we're not going to at all, we're not going to reward anything. We just want to quiet that down. So in that person, again, we had the benefit of the quantitative EEG, but I said, let's just inhibit things. And turns out that person was a firefighter, who had a lot of trauma, and good that a firefighter has fast alpha. They can make quick decisions. They can, anticipate things. They're on high alert, but we don't want them to lose that skill, but we want them to gain the skill of flexibility. So I said, let's teach their brain how to quiet down the alpha. They don't need anything else. They need to learn how to quiet down that alpha.
Yes, but Amy, let me see if this gives you a little guidance here. The initial protocol is the 2 to 7, 22 to 36, because for the average patient, that is typically what you want to focus on. But if in your midline assessment, or if you do anything looking at the EEG beforehand, if there are, indications that there's, excess elsewhere, you would want to then think about putting, that in your inhibit band, and you can either widen it. So for example, if you did see that there's a lot of alpha, you can widen it as is here, 2 to 11, or you can add another inhibit band and put that in separately. So you could have a 2 to 7 and an 8 to 11, for example. Now, I want to tell you this, and this is a good thing for you to kind of work toward. As you are training a person, and say you're in the typical 2 to 7, 22 to 36 protocol, you want to learn to look at, I mean, eventually the EEG, but that takes a little more practice. It's easier to look at this spectral here. That's where you get the oranges and then the reds. And if you're seeing a lot of orange and red in, say, 9 hertz or 17 hertz, that is an indication that maybe you should think about inhibiting that. So as you're training, you're going to learn to kind of watch to see, am I addressing with my filtering everything that should be addressed? Is that making sense?
Yes. It makes, so when I'm watching the training, I don't get yet what all the colors mean and what I should be
Well,
seeing.
Angie's bringing them up here, and we'll look at this.
Okay.
So you see here in this example, you've got the white, the orange.
Well, let's start with this. This goes from 1 to, right?
Yeah, okay, so the bottom there is the frequency from 0 to 40 hertz. And you can see below 2, there's a lot going on, and that's very, very typical because that's just artifact, but the white, the yellow, the orange, those are peaks. Those are, you know, the white is the highest, the orange is next. No, I'm sorry, the yellow is next and the orange. And, you know, ideally, you would like that to be relatively blue across the board. So as you're watching, say in this example, you were inhibiting 2 to 7, you can see you've got peaks there around 10 and 11. So you would think about using the protocol that's, you know, up there now, because you are seeing yellow and orange at 2 to 11.
I want to see if you get the filtered settings. Ugh,
I'm not sure what you mean.
what I asked you here. See, I'm trying, if in the simulation, can I show?
Did you put them on?
Aha,
Yeah, I mean, that's. Right. Yeah. There.
now what I want is the filtered displays. This is what I was asking you about here.
I don't know what that means.
I want to see the individual displays of the, I want to see this. I want to see the filtered displays.
I think that got closed out when you opened it, and I think that's only going to confuse people at this point.
To look at the individual filters to see how high they are.
In the EEG,
In the filtered EEGs, like in eager, you see the bands. I
Yes.
thought we had that available here.
yeah, but that won't change the spectral.
No, can you tell me where?
I don't know.
That's what I asked you here. Okay. Okay. One of the things that we're asking for is to have, this is the raw EEG, and we're looking to get what would the waveform look like in the filters. So from the 2 to 11 and in the reward and in the high inhibit. So then you can, you won't get a separate spectral display, but you'll get a reading like this that has only these filtered forms in it. Okay. Okay, so I have to go. You're going to pull up a report and go over it.
Well, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to switch over to Mitch's computer. You want to turn on your volume. I'm going to sign off. I'm going to go to that meeting or the webinar. It's going to be recorded. It's a webinar on HEG with the Northeast Region Biofeedback Society. Kristen can put the link in there for you, and you can watch it later as well. But I need to introduce this presenter. So see you guys.
Okay. You should be hearing me now. Okay. Thank you, Ann.
Have fun. Let's make her thanks.
Okay. So let me adjust what I'm looking at here. All right. So, again, just to reiterate, with the filtering, you begin off with 2 to 7, 22 to 36. That's your beginning protocol in most cases, unless you have evidence from some sort of a EEG assessment, whether it's a midline or a mini Q or a Q, that would tell you to use other inhibits. And then when you begin to train, you want to begin to learn to watch this spectral here and kind of make sure that the whites and the yellows are showing up in the areas that you are inhibiting, because those are the high amplitude areas. Okay, before we move on, is there anything anybody wants to ask about any of that? All right, let me pause all this. Okay. So next, let's review. Before you begin to train a person, or very, very early in the training, 1 or 2 sessions in for sure, you want to have agreed with your patient, with your client, what it is they are looking to see benefit in. I mean, is it that they want to be sleeping better? Is it that they want to be focusing better? Is it that they want to be less anxious? Is it, why are you doing the training? This is so important, and it seems kind of simple, but I'm amazed at the number of people who do neurofeedback, who provide it, and they kind of just ask their patient, hey, are you feeling any better? I mean, it's so vague, and I don't think that's the way that this thing works. And it's that feedback about the patient's functioning that leads you to tweak a protocol. Without that, it becomes a very vague process. So, and people may come in with a lot of concerns, and you're going to want to help them prioritize, because, for example, if a person is anxious and they also have difficulty focusing, well, the anxiety is about calming an area of the brain, and if you lessen their anxiety, there's a chance they'll focus better. But if they have an excess low amplitude type of ADHD, eventually you're going to want to activate a part of the brain. And so, you would not be training for both of those directly at first. And typically the way one goes, and this is important, if there are symptoms of underarousal and symptoms of overarousal, and the symptoms for the over arousal, I'm sorry, if the symptoms of the under arousal are not clearly the ones, I mean, if a person is extremely depressed, then yeah, maybe they get anxious occasionally here and there, or maybe they, you know, get it a little fidgety even in their depression, but the depression is the issue. Then you would focus on the depression, but generally you will, if there are shared over and under arousal things, you will want to approach, you want to deal with first the over arousal side. So in the example that I gave, you would first have the patient monitor their anxiety symptoms. And once you had those at a place that the patient was happy with, if the attention issues remained, you would then begin to train for the attention side. So training the over arousal down is typically the first thing that you're going to do, except in those rare cases, those relatively rare cases where under arousal is the obvious issue. Now, I want to check that what I just said is clear, because that can, be a little tricky. So
What about instability symptoms? I thought you did those first and then,
very good, yes. That, yeah. If, thank you. The severe instability symptoms, the seizures, the panic attacks, the migraines, severe mood swings, if any of those is there, that is, yes, that is what you would address first. Very true. I was talking about, and I should have been clear, in the absence of any of those, when you're looking at just the over and the under arousal, training the over arousal first is typically the way to go, because once the brain is able to calm itself, you can help it learn to activate, because it now has the ability to deactivate as it should. If it can't deactivate and you train out of the activation, usually that doesn't wind up well. Okay. Thank you though for that qualification. That's important. Anybody else? Are we clear about that whole thing about what you're choosing? So the point is this: when you go into that training session, you want to have in your head, based upon your assessment and based upon what you have agreed upon with your patient, that will be the focus of your training. You want to know that if and when you're going to change that reward band, are you going to lower it or are you going to raise it? You want to know that going in. And that should be based upon your assessment, whatever you do, the arousal assessment, some type of an EEG assessment. You want to know so that if it comes down to changing that variable, you know, again, we talked about the three variables: length of training time, reward band, high or low, and the other filtering and sensor placement. But in order to know how you will affect that reward band, you want to have an idea going into the training. Am I going to first lower it or raise it? Okay. Okay, so now you're in that first training session. We talked about you know how to get at the good impedance, you know how to set the filters, you now begin to train. You want to check with, and now we get into that thing that you should have received about the higher frequency initial session protocol guide. I assume you all received that. Yes, yes. Did it you, Kirsten?
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
Yes, did you receive within the last 24 hours the high frequency initial?
Oh, yeah, all
Okay.
the documents that you sent out, yeah, the protocols, yeah, I did.
Okay. Yeah, so I think we're going to review that a little bit here to make sure that you're aware of it. And then we will begin to look at reports. And we can also perhaps talk about clients, for example, Amy's husband or something. So you go in a session and you begin to train. Now, the other thing that I want, there is another variable here that you need to be aware of, which is the training screen. Okay. B-Lab has a wide variety of training screens, and they're there for a reason. Different people react very differently to different training screens. And in the future, there will be a little course available that will go into every one of those, and it will tell you what in that training screen reflects the low inhibit, what reflects the high, what's the reward band, what does this mean, what does that mean? You know, you can look at that in the manual and kind of get a lot of that, but for now, the point is this: you want to find a training screen for your client that kind of is sufficiently engaging, but it's not so engaging that they're on the edge of their seat, but it should be sufficiently engaging. If it's not sufficiently engaging and then they're falling asleep, that's also a problem. So you want to look for a screen that yeah, they find it comfortable to look at, and it kind of holds their attention sufficiently, but not so much. So that's, I mean, that's an important thing. And you want to make sure the patient is aware that they should be giving you feedback about that. Many patients, they don't know what they should be doing. And, you know, I've had people who I'll be training them, and, you know, we should be pausing every 5 minutes or so, which I'll talk about. And I'll ask them, you know, how are you doing? And then if I don't ask, you know, how is this screen for you? Some of them don't volunteer that. And at the end of a session, they'll say, man, I'm really, really, you know, glad that that's over. That screen was driving me crazy. Well, you want to avoid that. So you want them to know at the outset that if they find, we're looking for a screen that as I said, they find engaging, that allows them to have a relatively relaxed focus. We don't want them so relaxed that they can't focus, and we don't want them so focused that they aren't relaxed. And they should be giving you feedback about that as you learn about their preferences for screens. That's important. Anybody want to say or ask anything about that, Amy?
Can you change the screen in the middle of a training session? If
Yes,
it's driving them crazy? Okay.
yes. Which is very
And-
good about this. Some systems out there, in order to change, you need to get out of the training screen to change the training screen. Here, you can just pause it, you know, go to feedback, bring up the feedback menu, and choose another.
Okay. And then do we tell, so the one that my husband's been using, I can't remember, it's what you watch a ball and it bounces and knocks.
Hyperpong.
Yes. So do we tell them, are they trying to do something, or do we just say, watch the screen? Or do we say, focus on the ball and try to get it to knock the ledges off?
Well, very good. So with any of the screens, and this is why eventually it's kind of good to know what the various ones are doing. But in general, this is the way they work. When they are giving you the brainwave pattern that you are calling for with your filtering, things on this screen, many of them, the view widens. If they aren't giving you what you want, it will narrow, or it will become blurry. So the clearer, the wider the view, they are giving you what you're calling for. Things like Hyperpong, the speed, the faster that thing knocks apart things, the better. That's occurring when a person is in the brainwave pattern that you're calling for. The audio gets louder the more they are giving you the pattern that you're looking for. So in general, these are these are the sorts of things that I think okay. So in general, the message is you will be getting visual, auditory, and if you have the tactile bear, tactile feedback, and it will be telling your brain when you are giving us what we want and when you are not. The best way to do that, and different people do this differently. Some focus on just a very narrow little part of things. Others focus at the whole thing. You're going to find what works for you. But in general, what we're looking for, and I always come back to this, what we're looking for is that you achieve a calm focus. You want to have your focus be on the visual, the auditory, the tactile. You're aware of it. But you also don't want to be too tense or too relaxed. And you're going to find what works for you. Okay, anything else about that?
Thank you.
Sure. So, these are all the kinds of things that you want to tell a patient before the training session, and you may need to repeat these things along the way, depending upon the patient. Now, so you've got all that, and so okay. What you want to do is, because we're talking about, children usually won't, you say, okay, I'm going to be putting this on, you look, you listen, and they'll say fine, and then they'll do it. Adults, many of them will say, well, what do I do? What should I be doing? How do I do this? Adults, adults are, more controlling than many children are. So what I tell people is what I just said. You want to try to achieve a calm focus, and you want to focus on the visual and the auditory and perhaps the tactile. The mind is going to wander. That's what the mind will do. That's what the mind does. The mind wanders. So it will take off. When you become aware of that, just bring it back to the feedback. So that's that's, if a person asks, what do I do? That's ordinarily what I tell them. So now, before you begin the first training session, you want to ask the patient to kind of do a little self scan. How are they feeling? Kind of get a feeling for their relative tension, relaxation level, and the feeling for their focusing. Is their mind really racing? Are they able to kind of focus on what you're telling them and what's around them? Kind of just do a little self-assessment. And you say, okay, we will train for a while. I'll pause it, and then I will ask you to tell me, are you aware of any changes? And so you train for 4 to 6 minutes, and you're watching the patient, you're watching your monitor. If you begin to see, for example, in that spectral, it begins off and most things are pretty blue, but now all of a sudden there's reds and yellows and oranges, and you might, based upon that, pause it and say, hey, I'm just curious, are you aware of anything going on? And very often they'll say, yeah, I began to think about this, or I began to this, or I had a hot flash, or whatever. But if you see significant changes in the EEG or the spectral, that's a time to kind of pause things and ask, hey, anything happening? Because you want to correlate for yourself and for them. If they say, yeah, I began thinking about my daughter and she's having difficulty in school, blah, 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 you can say, well, I could see changes. So it helps to kind of validate and verify for them that what they think about has an effect upon their brainwaves. And for some folks, that can be really meaningful, and it can then make them become more willing, more wanting to kind of monitor their thinking and change their thinking, which is another part of a therapeutic process. But the point is, if you observe anything, don't hesitate to pause and say, hey, anything happening you're aware of? Okay, but failing that, you train for a few minutes, you pause it. And the emphasis is, is there any change in that self-assessment? Are you any more relaxed? Are you any more tense? Is it any more difficult to focus? Is it easier to focus? What's up with that? And you want to make them aware that you want them to tell you any other changes, whether they think it's related to the training or it isn't. I often uses the example, if suddenly you become aware of a yearning for a turkey sandwich, let me know, and I'll decide whether that's related to the training or not, because we want to be on the lookout. We are working with the person's brain and we are focusing on this, but there can be other accompanying changes, and some of those can be positive and some of them might be negative. And we want the person to give you that feedback, because that is what will lead you to tweak a protocol. Okay, so then you get that feedback, and now this, with that protocol guide, if it's neutral, using Amy's husband as an example, you would probably train long, you would keep training, because 5 or 6 minutes is not a lot of training for a lot of people. And you're probably going to want to see the effect of that first training before you do a lot of changing, because people might not feel anything in the 20 minutes that they're in the chair, but later that day, they say, oh, I slept better than I ever have, or my sleep was horrible, or, whatever. So in that first training session, if a person's reporting neutral, you're probably in most cases just going to train them for the 20 minutes and wait and see how they report to you. You let them know that typically the way this works, the first 24 to 48 hours following a training session is when effects appear. That also makes sense, right? And so you want them to be aware of that, and you want them to focus in particular on that first 24 to 48 hours. And when they return, you want to hear what they say about that. So again, the first session, the odds are, if they're reporting neutral, that's what you're going to train at. Similarly, if they report positive, you may as well keep it going. So neutral or positive in that first training session, and you are pausing every 4 to 6 minutes. So you will, pause it 2 or 3 times in the 20 minutes. As long as it's neutral or positive, that's where you'll wind up the session, and you will wait and see their report when they're in again. If it's negative in any of your checking points, you want to assess whether that negativity seems to be related to underarousal or overarousal. So if they say, yeah, I began to feel it, I began to feel a tension in my solar plexus, or I was aware of a tension in my jaw, or my mind began to race more than it was, or I began, anything like that. Or if it's under, they say, boy, it kind of reached a point, it was hard for me to, to keep my eyes open. I just, okay. Now, remember that I said, as you're going into this first training session, you want to, based upon the evaluation, have an idea where you think, if you're going to change that reward band, you will change it in that direction. You'll have a feeling for, is this a person that's prone to over arousal? So if I do change it, I will be lowering that reward band. And if a person reports to you some negative, the vast majority of the time, it's going to be in line with your assessment. It's a fairly rare occasion. It can happen, but that you say, man, this person is overly aroused, and you train them for 5-10 minutes, and they say, man, I can't, keep my eyes open, or, all of a sudden I'm feeling depressed, and I never feel depressed. Those things are very, very rare. So you assess whatever the negative effect was to its arousal, and you then adjust the protocol accordingly. And in most cases, you will be lowering the reward band. And you lower it at first by 0.5 hertz. So you would bring up your filters. Let me move this out of the way here. Okay. You would bring up your filters. And you would adjust your reward band. So I would go to 11.5 to 14.5. Okay. And then you train again for another 5 minutes or so, and you ask again. If the report is positive, certainly I would say for that first training session, you would then keep on training there. It's a positive. And then you would wait and see what the effect is the first 24 to 48 hours. If it again is negative, you would lower it again. If it's neutral, meaning, it's not any worse, it's not any better, you would lower it again, because you're looking to take away that which got worse. One of the good things about neurofeedback is if there is a negative effect, since the training caused it, we can be confident that there is a way to find a training that it will take it away. And the other positive to keep in mind is this. This is not a high impact, one trial learning type of a deal. This is a gradual thing. So even if there is a negative, and if at the end of that first session you haven't found their optimum reward frequency, whatever that negative is going to fade away. I mean, the brain will return to where it's been for the prior how many years. That's also true on the positive side. I mean, you aren't going to get a person who you train them once and they say, man, I never felt so good. And it's not like they will never need to train again. They can achieve that feeling, but it's going to take some repetition. So I am not aware, nothing's been reported where a person has had long-term negative effects from neurofeedback training. I mean, but this is why it's important that a person reports to you anything. If there's anything negative, you want them to tell you. I mean, there are patients, I've heard of cases where, the therapist hadn't made this very clear, and 6-8 training sessions along the way, the patient says, maybe I should tell you, but ever since the first training session, I've been getting headaches. Well, that should have been reported in the first training session. So. Okay, so let me ask, do you feel relatively confident about what you would want to do in your first training session? Yes, 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 yes. And then, you know, the second and the third, it's a similar process. Again, my approach is if you're getting something positive, train that till the benefit levels off, it plateaus. If there's neutral, as we said it earlier today, the first thing you would do is to train longer. So the next session, you might train 25 minutes, for example, and then reaching, as I said, a typical maximum of 30 minutes. And then if then you aren't getting anything positive, you know, it's just, I'm not feeling anything, then you begin to look at, you know, and along the way you've changed the rewarded frequency a few times and you aren't getting anything, then you're going to look at changing the sensor placement. If you're dealing with over arousal, you're going to go over to the right side. If you're dealing with under arousal, you'll be going over to the left side. In keeping with what Paula asked, if along the way a person reports a negative, that's in, you know, instability. So if they say, yeah, you know, I'm developing a headache, and in your prior assessment, you know, you will have kind of seen, yeah, maybe in the past they've, you know, had headaches, but they haven't been around for a while, blah, blah, blah. If that begins to occur, then you're going to want to change to T3 minus T4 and begin to train for stability. And at T3 minus T4, you will begin to adjust the frequency band, the reward band, looking for their optimum reward frequency, their ORF. And then, yeah, and then moving forward, you know, you take the same thing, you begin to pause, you ask them how things are until you find what seems to be their optimum reward frequency for now. Meaning that things are positive, and then that's where you're going to train for a while, like I said, until the benefit levels off, and then you'll evaluate is that enough of a benefit with this thing that you have been focusing on, a couple things, and if it is there now anything else to be addressed, or does it seem like there's more benefit that can be had with the symptoms you've been tracking? And then you will look for other sites to see if you can't have further benefit. And I think I outlined the typical first moves. The over arousal, you would go to C4. If you aren't getting, if there's more work to be done, or if you aren't getting what you need there, some people respond better to sequential training. So you would change from the referential C4 to CZ minus T4. So you're getting this whole area here. If you aren't getting what you want then, or you aren't getting enough of it, then the next protocol that gets used a lot for taming that arousal level is T4 minus P4. But these are things you will begin to talk about with your mentor. I mean, you should think about having a person as you begin to get into training more. You want to have a person you can check with when you run across things that you aren't sure what to do. All right. So that's that. Anybody have anything that they want to say or ask?
Can you go over one of the tables like Amy said?
Yes, I'm
once we-
going to pick one up here.
Cool.
So okay, so this just tells you where the training was. And this is, you can look here at the trend lines, of course. Here it has taken out these are the three bands that are in the filter. So you can kind of look at those and see, it gives you a visual, but the best way is this table here. Now, let me emphasize this. Data is good, but it's not the bottom line. And I need to emphasize this a lot. The bottom line is your patient and the symptoms that you are working toward benefiting. Fairly often, the data and the change in the symptoms will correlate. That's a good thing, but often enough, it won't. We can see significant changes in the data, and the patient and the patient's family or the patient's teachers or whatever say nothing's happening. Likewise, we can see relatively small changes in the data, and a person can say, man, this is wonderful, and the teacher says this is a whole another kid. I can't believe it. And people that do pre and post Q EEGs do not always see changes in the data that they look at that correlate with changes in the patient. And so you ask, well, what are we doing here? Well, let's face it, guys, the brain is very, very complicated, and we're looking at some rather gross variables here. These things are not capturing the totality of brain function, and we shouldn't kid ourselves. I mean, I actually think it's a miracle that we are able to get the kinds of changes we are doing, what the heck we're doing. It's an amazing thing. And so I use the data to kind of give me a feeling for, does the brain seem to be responding to the feedback? Okay, if I've got a person who isn't feeling anything, and I look across training sessions, and the frequency that I am rewarding is not getting any higher, and the frequencies that I am inhibiting are not getting any lower, well, then I'm going to have to think, well, wait a minute, this guy, this gal, for whatever reasons, is not responding, given that they're reporting nothing. Now, again, I can have a person that says, man, I feel wonderful. And I look at the data and I see little changes, and it's like, wow. But in a case where there's nothing happening, I will look at the data to see it, and one of the changes, so that talks about looking at across sessions. You can look at, are there changes? But we're in the update that we're working on and should be available to you guys fairly soon. We also asked them to give data for the first minute or two of training, the middle of training, and the end, so you can see during a training session, are there changes? You can look and see, does the brain seem to be reacting to the feedback? So those are the main ways that I use the data. Now, again, in a general sense, what can we look at? Generally, what we're looking at, that there is that 1/F principle. The F is for frequency, meaning that the lower the frequency, the higher the amplitude. All things being equal, the delta should have a higher amplitude than the theta. So over here, this should be higher than this. It is. 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 So this is actually pretty good. Let's look at someone else. That was me. I need to find my cursor. There it is. Okay. This is a person that has just had 1 or 2 training sessions. And I've not even looked at these yet. Okay. This is a person, we've been training her son. And it came to my attention that the mom has begun to have daily migraines since January. And I said, holy crap, I wish you had told us this. And so we have offered to train her while she always brings in her son. They come from far away. So we said, hey, we will arrange it so there will be a person here to train you. We aren't, for a while going to charge you, because I know their financial situation, but let's see if we can do any good for you. And if we can, then maybe we'll begin to charge you, but for now, no. So look at this. This is higher than this. This is higher than this. This is higher than this. But in the beta and then the high beta and also the gamma, I mean, this is higher than the delta. This is much higher than the delta. That is cortical intensity. That's, that is just too much high frequency amplitude. And so what I'll be looking for as we train her is that these will begin to become lower as we're going to be working on raising this, okay? And look at the theta beta ratio, 0.47. So I'm going to be looking to see, is that ratio rising at all? Are we getting less of a difference between the higher frequency amplitude and the lower frequency amplitude? So these are things that I'll be monitoring to see if it looks like she is responding to the training, but more importantly, she is keeping a log of her headaches. And here's an important point. Whenever you can, whenever it fits, have a person track frequency. Okay, she's been saying though every day, and so we'd be looking for a change in the frequency. Maybe there will be a day there is a headache, and that will say, this is good. Let's keep training here. Duration. Okay, she gets one every day. How long does it ordinarily last? And then does it begin to shorten? Because we can see a change first in duration before frequency. So if I'm only tracking frequency, but the change begins to occur in duration, I may think a protocol's not working by the frequency data, but the duration data says, no, this is getting better. And so, that's valuable. And then the third is intensity. Yeah, usually it occurs, it lasts for 2 hours, and it's on a 1 to 10, it's a 9. It's just horrible. I need to lay down. I can't do anything. Well, if it begins to be a 7, if it begins to be a 6, even if the frequency and the duration aren't changing, that tells me there's a positive effect. So I want to emphasize the importance of doing the best job you can to help your patient give you information about the symptoms or the symptoms that they want to get better, because that is what is going to direct your protocol changes. And if you are not getting the most information that you can, you may change a protocol when you shouldn't. And that's a loss. Okay, so we've kind of looked at a couple charts here. Was this at all helpful? I mean, are there other things anybody wants to
Can I just
add?
ask really quick, are the units of the mean in microvolts, so it's mean amplitude is like, for example, delta's mean amplitude is 5.34 microvolts?
Microvolts, yes. And
Okay,
let me tell you this. You may have, okay. There are two general ways to measure amplitude in the engineering world. One is from baseline to peak. The other is peak to peak, the peak of the mountain and in the valley. B-Lab has done it baseline to peak. Many of the other programs in the field do peak to peak. And so in the next version as well, you will have the option of which one, and we're probably going to urge you to do peak to peak and then leave it there, because what we were finding, there's a multiplier. If you do peak to peak, it's usually 2.83 times the baseline to peak. So you can calculate. So if I'm reading research and it's peak to peak, and I know my client is baseline to peak, I can adjust, but that should not be necessary. Since most of the research and many of the people you will be communicating with do peak to peak, you will have the option to do peak to peak. And when that becomes available, we will tell you, how to choose it, and you will choose it. What you are seeing now is baseline to peak, which again, for session to session comparisons is fine because you're looking at it the same thing, and for within a session, it's fine. But I just let you know that so that when the new version comes and we begin to talk with you about changing to peak, you'll know a little bit of what I'm talking about. So yes, those are microvolts. Now, The other thing we are changing in the future versions, the PFA, the peak frequency alpha, that is not microvolts, that's frequency. Okay, so this person's mean peak frequency alpha is 9.97 hertz. Those other ones are in, well, the EEG trends are microvolts. And obviously the ratios are ratios. But we are going to have that specified in the graphs so people aren't confused. Okay, anything else, guys? Amy, it looks like you want to say something.
I think I'm confused. So for example, if we just take the delta mean is 5.34 on this,
Yes,
and then delta is, I don't know, maybe I'm comparing things that should not be compared. So the delta range is 0 to 4. Am I
well, it's
comparing-
actually 0.5 to 4, but
okay.
yes.
So that's what we're looking at. So to see if this is kind of in a normal range or not.
Yeah, well, okay. There is a wide range for what is normal in the amplitude. So unless any of these is really high, so for example, the high beta here is really high. That should not be above 4. Okay, so that's really high. There's a wide range though of what can be normal, and different people, it's not, there is not an agreed upon range. I mean, it's not like they say, well, okay, the mean for the delta should be between 3 and 8. That they aren't really saying that. So you can't look at this by itself. That's why we look at the relative. Is the delta relatively high compared with the theta, the alpha, the low beta? And then you look at this particular person, is it changing at all, across sessions or within sessions? But don't, for now, don't get overly confused into the data. There is time in the future for you to begin to learn more about the data and what it may or may not mean. I really urge you to pay the most attention to your patient's symptoms, and just looking at the data, particularly across sessions, to see if you're observing any changes at all that seem to correlate with your patient's report.
Okay.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, guys, we meet again one more time. It's going to be kind of the wrap up. I forget the exact date. Maybe it's is it the 10th? Is it? I don't know. We all, have the date though, I'm sure. So we'll get together then. We will try to answer any questions that have arisen. We will also talk about what we think you might think about as you pursue this further, kind of how that should all work. Okay, Kristen just put in there that there's a lunch and learn on the 7th with Be Medic, where you can ask them things about their equipment, which is a good idea. And then our last meeting is the 20th. Both at noon, Eastern time. So, but again, in that last session, we will try to wrap things up so that you feel like you have sufficient confidence and sufficient direction moving into the future. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, guys.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Mitchell, is the recording going to be available for this? I wasn't able to.
Yes, sir. Yes, there will be one. Yes, it is the answer. It should be available in your Thinkific platform within a couple days. Here, the recording will be it says within 2 weeks. That just, gives us a lot of time, but
Okay.
typically it's there within a few days.
Thanks, Mitch.
All right, guys.
Yeah.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
See ya.